Cool. So let's see. I guess we kind of talked about as a default topic as a good starting point, which as we know, we'll probably be able to take it in other directions, maybe be a little bit more loose with it today. But one of the themes that always comes back to my mind, like whenever we're adjacent to the order or really any of these organizations, is how can we scale the organization? How can we kind of continue to accelerate cooperation? There's a lot of individuals there's a lot of us out there with very similar ideas and very similar goals, but it's very hard for us to get from A to B when we're all working as individuals. And to speaking of what we are just talking about, like companies, that seems to be one. That's how things happen. Organization, getting together, cooperating. So it's kind of like, you know, how do we learn from that? How do we recreate that kind of efficiency in a more cultural capacity where we're not paying you, we don't necessarily have a service or a product outright. We're more driven by our own ambition and our own desire to make the world better. So it's like how do we build cooperation and structure in that is what something I think about a lot.
Yeah, I also think it's important not to mix business with, I would say, a frame.
Right.
When I look at what you're referring to as a quote unquote movements, right?
Right.
Whether it's a spin-off or regardless,
Hmm.
um, you typically the default is going to be a Greek school of thought. So you have Plato as an example, and he had a school, which is just him spouting out ideas on a way to process the world around him and information.
Right.
And then he had counter people, right, who also had acolytes, and they would discuss and debate and do these kinds of things.
Hmm.
And over time, the most correct school of thoughts or way to process information
Right.
wins because you're able to have more success. So that's scaled a little bit differently than, say, a business when you have something when you're saying it's like it's not paid. This people when me and you speaking, we're articulating information.
Right.
It's helpful for us individually to just talk to each other. It
Right.
helps us, but also as we have a series of conversations, we're building a frame to perceive reality in.
Right.
And that's helpful not just to us, but to other people who, because in our world, everything's deconstructed now.
Right.
So a lot of people are just wandering through life and they're lost. And a lot of the, let's call them intellectuals, are getting kind of burned out across the board. They're all getting burned out. And if they're
Yeah.
not getting burned out, they're just losing their touch. And so it's up to the younger generation, like Jordan Peterson as an example. He's getting old. He's getting burned out. It's honestly reminding me a lot of Chomsky.
Hmm.
Chomsky was this huge intellectual guy, and then he got old. He just lost touch. So it's
Yeah.
up to the younger individuals to start talking about things,
Right.
and it doesn't have to exactly be organized. But the more conversations we can have, the better we can understand the world and move forward.
Yeah.
And then once you get to a certain point, like with Kurt, you can start writing down a series of laws, being like, this is how the world is should be processed for optimal life living.
Yes.
And you can kind of extrapolate as much as you need to.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree. I guess let's see. So we're talking about like trying not to mix the two. Like the difference between a business and a frame is kind of how you let off, and then like, I'm thinking about this the sphere of like, for example, you said like Greek or philosophical kind of conversations where we're just sharing frames, having conversations, and the best ideas kind of flourish. And that's kind of a default. That's kind of a default behavior that just kind of happens among people, like on Twitter and across these spaces. This is kind of something that's already happening. But I guess the way that I'm thinking about it is kind of akin to almost like more of like what a church would do. As I've expressed before, because when you're just sharing ideas, that's great, that's important. But if there's not like a kind of an action kind of around it, or like a ritual around it, or like a accountability, or some of these kind of things that are more organizational.
Yeah, I know where you're going with this. This
Right.
is why my foundational reference was Plato.
Right.
Plato had a physical school where they did physical things,
Right.
and as a community, they went out and they practiced fighting. They went out and I believe they waged war, like physical war against the other groups.
Interesting.
I mean, well, I guess it would be probably more simulated. I have no idea. honestly exactly how that went
It could
because
be
I'm
could be
not
like
super
those
educated in
could
Greek.
be like those Russians who just get together in groups and just go beat the shit out of each other for sport. uh, yeah,
No, yeah,
yeah.
I do understand what you're getting to though.
Yeah, I like that though. I mean, I like that we can take a lot of from the Greco-Roman models about how they carried about things. You know, they have these like what is that quote? Sometimes I think it's a quote that's been misattributed at times, but it's basically like if you separate your warriors from your philosophers, you know, or whatever, you'll have your philosophy done by idiots and your wars fought by cowards or something like that. So that, you know, the Greco-Roman is definitely more of that Renaissance man kind of model, which I really like. Um, yeah,
Well, it works because it emerged from Dark Age.
well, I mean, and it pre-existed a dark age. Well, obviously, the word Renaissance is particularly, but you know, obviously, the Renaissance was reviving a lot of those concepts as Greco-Roman kind of traditions that preceded the Dark Age. Um, but I do agree that's part of the cycle is naturally, yeah. Once you come out of it, you're going to be better off.
Yeah, because the biggest issue that we're having now in the West is that we don't have meaning per se. And
Right.
for those of us, you know, because largely we're just resorting to consumption. So video
Mm,
games, purchasing things, you know,
right.
the whole consumer movement where they're just buying fucking Funko Pops for whatever the hell reason.
Yeah.
It's like, why are you doing that? They don't know, but they're just makes them feel better temporarily.
Right.
And they're not able to express thoughts or understand how to frame things. So I think that some different like schools of processing is definitely super useful. I mean,
Right.
in natural law work, your base natural law, did you base it off of Aquinas or is it off of something else entirely?
You talking about
Because
like
I
the
honestly don't.
you talking about the ideas of the natural order or like the natural law or what?
Yeah, so your the natural order, is it based off of Aquinas or like natural law, or is it based off of something else?
It takes inspirations from a little bit of everything. I would say there's not a conscious direct reference to Aquinas, but there may be some similarities. There definitely is an inspiration from natural law. Like I like the way that was, yeah, a lot of the connotations and descriptions and everything that surrounds natural law, just like
Yeah,
is big.
just so we can make sure we're on the same page when we're explaining this. When you say natural law, are you referring to Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica, where he uses a process called natural law to understand the world through the frame of to understand the Bible within the frames of reality? Is that what you're talking about, or is it something else?
I think so, but we can dig on it a little bit to kind of build some cohesion. Because funny enough, like whenever I got involved with the institute, this was a problem for me too. Because whenever most people hear it within a modern context, you hear natural law, you think, okay, the laws of nature, like physics, chemistry, like biology, that makes sense, like things that we've been able to objectively prove. And then, you know, even the soft sciences like psychology and sociology are obviously kind of built on top of that. So it all kind of fits. And so that was my frame, and I think it still is pretty similar to that. But within the
A
institute, the way
scientific method kind of situation.
sorry, what'd you say?
So like a scientific method kind of situation, yeah.
Pretty much, and I will say that the I think within the institute it's pretty much that, except they make a little bit of a distinction. Like they will say laws of nature when they're talking about like physics and chemistry and so forth, and when they say natural law, they are more so talking about like the applications of that to sociology and psychology, as well as how we manifest it like into our actual laws. So you know there's like at least three different laws you're talking about here. Now you've got like human law, like you know like the constitution and so forth. And then you've got laws of nature like physics and chemistry. And then you've got what they call natural law, which is kind of a bridge between the two. Again, it's kind of like the psychology and sociology layer. So that's how they understand it. I'm kind of in that mix just for the sake of trying to use the same words that other people are using. But we can expand on it a little bit more maybe.
No, no, that makes sense. I'm just trying to understand so I know a frame to move forward with. That's
Yeah.
all.
Yeah, I would just say for me, natural law at the most simplest sense is just like the laws of nature. It is starting with the math, the physics, the chemistry, the biology built on top of that, the psychology built on top of that, and the sociology built on top of that. Like that's the stack that I work with. Those are the words that I use. I think it's similar with the other guys, but maybe a little bit different. So yeah. So yeah. So what about
Okay,
so
that
what
sounds
about
good.
your is that kind of your is that similar enough to what you're going at and what Aquinas is kind of describing, or you think it may be a little bit different?
Well, no, Thomas Aquinas is just a Christian theologian.
Right.
It's just that was where I was first exposed to natural law.
Yeah, and I think the
It's
term I
his.
think that it is
Because
a
remember, I grew up Christian. Remember,
right,
just like
same.
you, and
Yeah.
so, but when you get a lot of it's very academic in the Baptist faith. So
Right.
there's a lot of material and reading and such. And so Aquinas is something that the Catholic priests read, but it's also something that we in the churches that I
Mm.
grew up in read because it was a way to understand the world through the Christian lens without violating. A common issue with Christians today is they ignore reality in
Mm.
favor of like they hyper focus on verses, and then they
Yes.
attribute more and more complex situations to those simplistic verses.
Yes.
Aquinas kind of integrated it with his Summa Theologica, um,
Yeah, that's very
and I think
important.
he did a relatively good job. But that's what I was more referring to, like the natural law through that lens. But I understand.
Yeah.
The only reason that was I thought was the lens is because prior we had spoken about Christianity, and
Right.
I thought
Yeah.
we were continuing that.
Well, yeah, we definitely will continue to probably intersect that frame and go back there. And I will say that a couple of notes, like when I came across Aquinas, I did feel like he was one of the best like Christians out there as far as trying to do like what you said, trying to reconcile it with reality and making sure that you're at least not violating reality and stuff. And that's one of the biggest themes that always I bring up in conversations with or about Christians is y'all need to be able to reconcile with nature. As long as you are not contradicting nature outright, then we can work with that. That's the via positiva. As long as it's not violating the negativa, we're fine. But like you said, they hyperfixate on the verses. There's all these kind of like all these miracles. Just a total disregard for evolution and natural selection. Yada yada. So those are some of the problems. But um, one one thing we could kind of do is to come back to the loose topic of this one, is about organization building. And so I'm kind of pushing in the direction of I want something that looks kind of like a church. And so again, and that's the kind of conversation that brings us back to Christianity, because that's one of the best and only examples we really have of that in the West and in history. So it's kind of like, okay, well that's our starting
But
point. So
you
what can we
have
do better?
guilds too.
Huh?
Guilds that no, it wasn't just the church; it was guilds too.
Guilds. Interesting. That's funny. I kind of heard of the we've been talking about like the Freemasons on and off, and they kind of have, they're still kind of rooted somewhat in the scripture and Christianity and the temple and some of that kind of stuff, but it's a little bit more esoteric at the same
How much of
time.
an education, and I don't know is an acceptable answer. How much of an education in late medieval times into Renaissance into industrialization do you have?
I would say I would just say like I would seem like an average for like for an intellectual, for someone who does read history and know what's going on, maybe average, yeah.
Yeah, so there's something that a lot of people don't know. When I say guild, I'm not shocked that Freemasons came to your head. A guild was primarily it kind of emerged with the new age of like mobility. So like the front, you had the merchant classes after Rome fell, quote unquote.
Right.
There was still a system, like a networking system across what we would call the globe, with outside of the where we're at in the West,
Americans,
in
yeah.
America.
Yeah.
And one of the issues, right, because not everyone was religious,
Mhm.
um, you had your tradesmen, and then the tradesmen would manufacture guilds over time. And so if you were a blacksmith and your son wanted to be a cobbler, your son would not live with you. When he turned 12 years old, he'd go live with the cobbler.
Right.
And that evolved into a couple of different things over time, and it looked different in various countries and at various time periods.
Mhm.
But in America, what would happen is when you'd have people come over and they'd have a foundation, you'd have, like Italy, you'd have Italians come over and there'd be an Italian guild. And you would go, this I mean, it was not even that long ago that we had them. It wasn't until the unions came about that they were destroyed completely.
Right.
You'd have an Italian guilds, and you'd come over on the boat, and as long as you worked, it didn't matter if you were 5 or 500. Is if you worked, you had a cot, you had someone taking care of you, and then as you got older, the guild remained to take care of you in your old age, and the younger generation, who was also members of those guilds,
Right.
continued on and took care of you, even if you were single or your family died of plague or war, or whatever the case is.
Mhm.
It wasn't until the 20s, 1920s, with the rise of feminism, that
Mm,
they pretty much destroyed those. Between feminism and the unions, a lot of it kind of just fizzled out.
right.
And between regulations and everything else, because when you go on a boat, like you can't just say like who like. I'm trying to think the best way to explain this without monologuing too long. Trust started to erode between men when
Mm,
women got power. So
interesting.
the guilds relied on masculine trust of kinfolk.
Right.
Women, when they maintained power, pretty much destroyed that, and it was just men and women, which is where the nuclear family largely came from.
Interesting.
Um, a lot of conservatives attribute the nuclear family to being masculine. It's like, but that's just 1950s nostalgia. It's not. The women run the house and they run the husband. That's why they like nuclear families.
Yeah.
Um, but when they destroyed those, the men didn't have guilds and the women no longer had security, and so now everyone's just lost. But no, yeah, if you what it sounds to me, if I can come back to my thought because I'm just monologuing here. It sounds to me like you want to manufacture some sort of guild, and there were guilds for, courtesans. There were guilds. I mean, in the fantasy world where you have video games, they had thieves guilds and mercenary guilds. Like
Right.
they've always existed for most of, I would say, civilized history. So this would have been after post Bronze Age.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, that's what worked for most people. So if you have a guild, you need to have a purpose, something you do, and then a way to conduct yourself. And it doesn't have to be super complicated. Like, if I'm an Italian, there is a specific characteristic set, including DNA, that requires for me to work in an Italian guild where I can be protected.
Yeah.
That's kind of where like the whole Godfather situation came from. Like in the mob back in the day,
Right.
they came from the guilds,
Yeah.
and a lot of the issues actually was because the guilds fell apart, and so they ended up resorting to crime, which is actually kind of funny.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Yeah.
that sounds to me like that's kind of like the model that you want to aim for. You don't want
Yeah.
to do a think tank like Kurt. You don't want to do a church because you don't really have something you pursue. I mean, I guess you can do like the Jordan Peterson pursuit of the highest, but I think a guild is more appropriate.
Yeah. I like that idea. It makes me think of a lot of things. Um, and I don't know. Like I do. It's funny that you said the rise of unions kind of is what partially deteriorated guilds, and I was thinking the same thing. And my idea of guilds is very much in that same space of unions. Is it is a lot more like kind of profession related, and it almost in some ways sounds just like a like before you had more organized civilizations, you kind of just had like little villages or stuff that were kind of looking out for each other, and it's kind of is like that. It's just like a group that's just almost like a pseudo tribe, and I definitely think there is some merit to that, and there is some intersection of that. But I do feel like it is more in the church direction. I do think there is something that I am pursuing, that I want to pursue, that I think others are already pursuing. And this is again, it goes back to the idea of they're pursuing it naturally. It's what we as individuals all want. It's just like a good life for ourselves and our families and kids and our nation. Like it's just it's just the natural way to do things, and it's kind of just like again, Christianity is positioned in that way to operate on a community level, to do a lot of what guilds do, like for people to look out for each other and stuff. It's just that their values. It's just that their values and some of the more technicals about what they think and how they operate that I think could be done better. That's. But again, yeah, it's a little bit of both, maybe.
So explain to me your church in a rough model in your head then. If that's because I'm having a difficult time
Yeah,
being able to even vocalize it
yeah,
as if I understand you. So can
yeah,
you just give me like a rough? It's gonna be rough, obviously, because you're still articulating this. So I'll be patient. But
yeah. No,
like,
that's
just
that's a
gonna
great.
like give me a rough model of what your church is.
Yeah, that's a great prompt, and it's really about what do you want it to be? Because right, it's like again, at the baseline, it's just like it's just connections. It's just like an idea. It's very loose. It is still being articulated and stuff, but yeah, there is a good bit of substance in my mind about what I think it could be, and the way I would say it is that I think at the foundation, especially within a progression, I would see it kind of being very digital at first. Basically just like continued interactions like this, like individual interactions, groups of guys getting together, sharing ideas, And out of that, you start to build alignment. Like, hey, we kind of think the same thing. We're on the same page. And then, like you also, I think something you said earlier too about once you start to see those same patterns, you can just start to actually script that out and say, here's our group's constitution. It's not necessarily meant to be like a constitution for America, but it's just like, here's our group. Here's what we believe. Here's what we stand for. Here's some of the basic rules that we go by. And that this is how it kind of starts to manifest, and you kind of get more people involved. Hey, I like what they're doing. They're picking up on the same ideas. We're on the same page, and it just creates this collaborative environment. And at the baseline, it's just people interacting, sharing ideas, helping each other learn and grow, supporting each other. And then the goal, though, is to try to get it into the locality. As you get big enough numbers, like, and the Institute is already starting to reach this threshold where when you get enough people connected digitally, there's a good chance that at least a few of you will be within a local range of each other. And this is what happened for us. I was able to go meet two or three other guys within kind of the circles who we live close together. And so this is just how it starts to build. And then when there's enough of you within enough proximity, you can start doing more IRL events, start recruiting more people locally, even start to have your own like little building or church or whatever you want to call it, like community center. And it just grows from there until you're at the point where, Christianity is obviously kind of declining right now, but look at how much infrastructure they have right now. There's church in the South, as you kind of know, you lived in the South. There's churches on every street corner. They're everywhere. Churches everywhere. And what's going to happen when Christianity declines? That's a bunch of free like buildings and infrastructure that's not being used. But in its peak, and even still today, Christianity it influences local politics. It influences what kind of jobs you can have. It influences like economy. It influences what people think. It influences so many things. It is like the glue of a community. And so yeah, I'm just kind of trying to build on that model and just try to do it a little bit better.
So it sounds like you want to guild with Christian marketing tactics.
Roughly, yeah, you could think of it that way. I think like you hear it called the order too. Like a lot of it is kind of modeled, especially at this stage, off of like an occult order, like an esoteric society, which is again kind of ties into like sort of like the Freemasons and some of that kind of stuff. But the goal is to be more expanded. I don't want to just be like a bunch of guys behind closed doors doing secret shit. I want to like have a presence in the community, even if that's a separate branding. We'll figure that out.
So, do you have something concrete like the Ten Commandments? And I think that might not be super easy. Like Kurt, when you go on his website, he has like his is not super condensed. He kind of like breaks it into chunks over time.
Yeah.
Kind of like I'm reading a legal document almost.
Yeah.
Do you have a methodology of simplifying tenets as you would? And you could even summarize those tenets, like when I was growing up, I was like 13 or 14. All my friends played Assassin's Creed. We used to go running around telling nothing is true, everything is permitted. And we didn't have a damn clue what that means. We do now. I do now because I read Alamuts. But,
right.
Things like that where you could think like what attributes to you. Like my favorite symbol is I took from a 2017 show called Taboo on FX. It's their Sinkafa.
Mm-hmm.
And I have that symbol everywhere. I got like a couple of them right there.
Hell yeah.
And I like it. It's very the aesthetic, I think, and like what it means, which is it is not wrong to go back and fetch which one has lost, is what it translates to from Tweet to English.
Hell yeah.
And I like it. I like the symbology of it. So I stole it and I write it everywhere.
Yeah.
I kind of like it. So just something like that, just something that appeals to you, a saying or a symbol. It doesn't matter where the hell it's from. Take it because it's gonna, the origin will be forgotten in 20 years anyway. So who cares?
Yeah. Yeah. So as far as so I'll say when it comes to like actual like principles, like the Ten Commandments, for example, I think to some extent when it comes to that level of detail, it's something I think about a lot, and I could probably whip something up. But like I said, as far as the progression that I see in my head, I think it would be really good to have a kind of at least a small group and some alignment built out of that. And then the group comes together to create those principles rather than me up front as like an individual or only like 2 or 3 people kind of doing it.
I have an alternative suggestion.
Sure.
Put 10 Commandments together and have a bunch of people rip it apart.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the process too. Whether you start, and yeah, and that's a good challenge. I'll try to do that. I was looking at my website right now to see if I had anything close. I mean, like on the front page, there are like principles,
Keep
overview, like
forgetting
there's
you have a website.
yeah. Definitely check it out. That it'll probably it's got a lot of that. But as far as like I literally have a principles section right here, but it's very loose. It just like it centers around nature. That's kind of the guide stone, truth and nature. Like those are the key kind of tenets, and it kind of just comes out from there. You get balance, you get evolution, you get focus on your ancestry and Europeanism. Like these things start to manifest out of that hierarchy of values. So, but again, yeah, I could work on continuing to make it better and get other people's feedback. But there's a good bit to go off of already. You talked about the symbols. Like obviously we have like the kind of the Celtic tree, which the way I've described that is just about being rooted in the science and the natural law, but also being able to branch out into the various symbol systems and religions and philosophies and kind of being able to bridge those together. And then there is the saying, as above, so below is on there, which is just obviously like that concept of everything, the hermetic kind of principle that things reflect the same pattern on different layers. So yeah, there's a few like pieces like that already kind of swimming around as far as like what is this thing? What does it look like? What are some of the pieces of it? And it's really the next step for me is like just like the subject of this conversation kind of goes is just like how do we connect with more people? How do we kind of continue to scale? What are the obstacles? What might make this sound better to people, or that kind of discussion. So yeah, it's pretty good.
What is your first idea, I would say, for scaling? I think maybe maybe you mentioned a couple of different things, but like
Yeah. So, like I said too, the foundation is just networking, just talking, just sharing ideas, like at a very base, like kind of neutral level. Like that is the fertile ground where these kind of things grow from. But I do have a section on the site that I'm looking at right now that's I call it bridges. And so again, the concept of the roots of it are in the natural law and literally like in the institute. Like I try to be rooted and be consistent with their negativa and their kind of framework that they're building. But as part of the branching out and trying to kind of market that and network and connect with other people more, what I'm able to do is I have a few different kind of like branches written down. So one of the big target audiences that we're probably both engaged in is just this larger sphere of the dissident right, you may call it. Right. So this is like kind of a political group that we're trying to kind of network with and try to help them kind of stay rooted in the natural law as well as not be so like pigeonholed and so like specific, trying to like actually be able to organize. And then of course we talk about Christianity a ton, paganism a ton. So all these different groups, there's different people that align with these different sets of ideas, and so it's really just about trying to build networks between them and try to get us all kind of cooperating enough to tackle some of these core challenges that are facing us all, right? And build something in the process, build a community at the same time.
yeah, I definitely agree with you there.
Yeah, and so some of the other ones too, like even just pop culture. Like we did a video with Paul where we talked about Back to the Future, and there's so many people out there that they don't realize it. But there's almost like a religion that surrounds a lot of these musicians or a lot of these TV shows, or like you even said, Assassin's Creed. Like it sounds like you, like a lot of us, have gained inspiration through the games we grew up playing. Like these gave us like powerful archetypes and powerful symbols and things that we connected with. So that's so many people just kind of follow those things and don't really, it's so funny. Like you even said earlier about the Funko Pops, like a lot of these neckbeard Reddit atheists are kind of like, oh, fuck Christianity and stuff, but they worship these like fictional characters, and they don't realize that is their religion. And so it's just kind of about helping that to turn into something, basically. So rather than just consuming, like you said. So
Yeah, that's definitely a huge issue that I'm seeing. It's the consumption.
yeah. That's obviously like what we're steeped in. The history of the Western kind of lineage is very individualistic, but of course the Industrial Revolution and capitalism and all these kind of factors did not help. It made it even worse. So Yeah, that's definitely something we got to
Yeah,
work.
exactly.
That's definitely something we have to work through. And a lot of people will just like revert to something like Christianity because it's there, and try to, for example, they'll try to just reject all things material and be like, oh, the material world is fleeting. I'm going to heaven. That stuff's all evil. It's not quite that. That's just one of the many problems. But yeah, man, it's just there's such a rich world of symbolism and archetypes and things that we connect with. And I'm just trying to help kind of manifest that, help that kind of grow, and yeah. So that's kind of an overview as far as what the next steps are. Just trying to reach out to people from these different schools of thoughts, whether it's the dissident rights or the Christians or the pagans, and just kind of like help create a
Sent
frame
you,
that we can all
sorry
share.
to, I sent you an IM of something I wrote I wrote it for a fantasy novel, or like a script that I was writing.
Hell yeah!
But I wrote it as if it could be translated into reality.
Ooh, I love
So
that.
that is the title is just something I throw together. It's stupid. But the tenets, as you break it down, I tried to make it as realistic as possible. So something like, you know, one liner explain
Yes, this looks
might
dope.
just be useful.
Yeah, this is awesome. I look forward to breaking this down. I think this is probably like very much in a similar direction, and that's kind of the funny thing too. Like like you said, and this goes back to the power of fiction. Like we play these like fictional video games and so forth, or even we'll say we even write fictional stories, and that's kind of where it starts. That's where we play with ideas, and then it's like, oh shit, we could manifest this. Like we could make this for real. And if you've seen my talks with Maneuver on I technically don't post them on the Natural Order. I just do them on my channel. But he's kind of like a sci-fi writer who also is kind of trying to manifest something in the space, and this is how it developed for him too. Is it just started out as fictional world building, and then he said, "This is actually helping me figure out what I'd like to actually do in reality." Um, Hell yeah,
Yeah, as humans, we are ingrained in mythology, and we see the world through stories.
yes,
That's something that a lot of the famous psychologists really hit on.
oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. Young. I'm trying to think too. So this is reminding me, like speaking of fiction, like growing up,
Piaget also.
huh?
Piaget also. Although I liked his work a lot because he tried to marry science and religion.
Ooh, I
And
like
then
that.
Jordan Peterson did a good job of finishing Jung and Piaget's work. I think
Interesting.
he actually did successfully do it. If you read Maps of Meaning, which is boring as all hell, I would say that Peterson probably successfully married religion and science
Yes.
through a specific frame. So
Right.
he at least laid a foundation, that a finished foundation. Um, but it requires nihilism to be absent, which
Hmm.
is a problem in a materialist society.
Yeah.
So I think that Jordan Peterson's work might need some scaling that I don't think he is up to the task at this moment, and probably will not be.
Yeah.
Um, because he's getting to that age where he's not going to be useful anymore.
Right.
And he's becoming more neurotic, which is extremely common. Think of anyone in their old age that, with the exception of Kissinger, which I have a lot of respect for Henry Kissinger. I know a lot of people hate him, but I like him.
Yeah.
He understands power in a way that I don't think most people do.
Yeah.
He aged gracefully. Everyone else did not.
Yeah. With that, I did not know that. Well, I guess I could have. It does. It's no surprise that Jordan Peterson has kind of worked in this like bridging science religion space. It's a pretty critical kind of effort within our last century or so. Starting with some of like the Freud, Jung, Joseph Campbell's, like some of these guys really got the ball rolling. And that's very much the area I operate in, and I think I've independently come to a lot of these same conclusions, and that's very much where this space I operate in and this project I'm trying to manifest comes from. Is yeah, trying to bridge that gap, like almost like a scientific religion, or a religious science, whatever you want to say. But yeah, I like that a lot. I was gonna say, going back to how things kind of start in fiction and manifest, growing up, I love cartoons. I love to draw, and I was drawing a lot of characters. And when I got to like around college age, obviously that's the time to like really be seriously thinking about what you want to do. And I thought for a time that that's what I wanted to do. I was like, I want to make stories. I want to like create characters. But I had to ask the question, well, what kind of story am I trying to tell? What kind of message am I trying to get across? What do I actually believe that I want to see out there? And that's what kind of kicked off my journey. That's what got me into things like Jung and looking into like science and asking all these questions, which just exploded my curiosity and kind of went from there. And now we're at the stage of, okay, I think I have a pretty good frame to work with. Now, how can I apply it? How can I manifest something out of that? And yeah, so that's what we're engaged in. Hell yeah. Um,
Cool, cool.
I was curious if would you be interested in maybe a different time too, or even this time. I was I kind of wanted to go through some of the points in your document and just kind of like talk about it. Maybe for next time, it's up to you.
We can do that right now if you want.
Yeah, let's run it. I won't read all the details, but we'll see what we can make out of this. This is pretty exciting. Um, so and I guess since anyone watching may not have seen the document, so you said you call it the I'm curious about the name. So you call it the Sankofa project. How do you pronounce that? Oh, I think you cut out.
Yeah, it's
Oh, there we go.
Sankafa project.
Sankofa.
So
Okay.
like I said, this is an African symbol, which is very confusing coming from a white man who's never set foot in Africa. Well, specifically that part of Africa.
Right.
So the Sankafa symbol comes from Ghana. It comes from the ancient Twi, not the modern Twi.
Mm-hmm.
This was, you know, the what was the anyway, that's a history tangent that's not necessary to understand
Sure.
the topic.
Sure.
It comes from the that community spoke mostly in symbols, and they obviously spoke their
Wow.
dialect. They were called the Adinkri tribe.
Okay.
Um,
Interesting.
the Sankafa symbol, and most Africans who are into their roots, you can talk with them. They'll know the symbol. The
Right.
this is a This it just means it is not wrong to go back and fetch which one has already lost, right? Do not essentially learn from the past.
Right. So it's
And
the
if you've
same. Yeah.
forgotten your past, go learn it.
Man, oh, I love that. And so this is the same symbol you're just talking about. And one thing that makes me think of is like this is kind of some of the value of the. Oh, I think I hear some echo. By the way, you may want to. I don't know if you're able to toggle or whatever. But so one of the things that reminds me of is like this is some of the value of the modern kind of African situation is a lot of them still live in a very tribal way, and this gives us insight into how a lot of us probably our ancestors lived at that later, a longer time ago. And that, you look at like Nordic societies, they had runes, like they had a lot of magic into the imbued with these symbols. And so there's a lot to be said there, and a lot of it we have lost, or is there's just a certain set of Abrahamic symbols that we kind of focus on. But anyway, yeah, that's really good. I love that. Um,
Yeah, but the symbol itself, which I may have actually linked down in the bottom, I don't recall.
oh, let's see.
It may it
Ooh,
may or may not be there.
yeah, it's like it's a pretty complex thing. I see like a triangle in the middle. It almost looks like two animal skeletons on the outside. I don't know if that's what you're talking
I
about.
drew that. So that's my version. It's my crest. I drew that. Or
Hell
I
yeah,
painted it.
I dig it.
Um yeah, that one I saw in a dream, but the
Wow.
symbol itself came from a show that the bird came from a show called Taboo, with
Right.
Tom Hardy. It was branded on his back, and it was seen a couple of times in the show. But anyway, I liked the meaning of the symbol, and so I started to elaborate on that in my head. And then over time, because I like to create scenarios in my head,
Mm-hmm.
mostly it is fantasy, but also real life.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
started to build a story arc in my head
Hell yeah.
of a kind of like an Assassin's Creed style arc, but more based in reality
Right.
and less esoteric. And I was like, okay, well, if this was going to work in real life, I would need to create a code of ethics that's all encompassing that could work anywhere in the Western English speaking world. And
Right.
so I spent 2 years writing it. And it's funny because it's only 2 pages, but it took me 2 years to finish it. And it's
Right.
probably still not done.
Hell
But
yeah.
yeah, I tried to make it as iron tight as possible.
Mm-hmm.
When I was writing it, as like, okay, if I have an acolyte and I give him this piece of paper, can he just go and abide by the tradition that I'm manufacturing for, whatever? And
Right.
that was what I came up with.
Hell yeah. I love that, man. That's so cool. Like, yeah. Again, this is very much in the space that I operate in, and like maneuver some of the other guys. So I'm really happy that. And this is the thing you find too is that once again, this is the idea that so many of us are picking up on this same thing. Like we grew up watching these shows, playing these games, or we grew up in churches, and we say, okay, wow, there's something valuable here to being able to operate like this with a group who can kind of collaborate and have the same values. But we could do it a little bit better, or we could try to build what we've learned from fiction and actually manifest it. And so like that's what we're engaged in. Hell yeah.
Yeah, I saw a joke on online a couple weeks ago. It was like the ancient Greeks became legends because they grew up listening to Homer's Odyssey,
Fuck
but
yeah.
I grew up playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey. So,
I love that. Man, I love it. Man, like, yeah, that's one, again, of all those kind of bullet points as far as like bridges and thing, like if you do think about in the modern day, like on average, like where do people draw the most like powerful connections to symbols and to
video
archetypes?
games followed by movies. TV
Exactly.
shows less so, but
Yeah,
video games followed by movies, and
like
then books as a foundation.
yeah, it's all like modern kind of adaptations, and of course a lot of that is rooted in like ancient kind of stuff, right? But you know, I'm looking at this list of like, okay, you've got science, like dissident rightism, you know, Christianity, paganism, Europeanism, you know, Greek philosophy, occultism. Those are all great, but really, I would say, you know, it's so funny. So I got a tattoo, my first tattoo last weekend, and I was like starting to think about what I would want to do for my next one, and like do a sleeve. And you know, a lot of it incorporates a lot of this stuff. I want to do some pagan stuff that like involves my ancestral roots. I want to do some like some occult stuff, and I want to do some like science stuff. But more than anything, the thing I want to do first is a pop culture sleeve that's got like things that I grew up with, like Pokemon or like Yu-Gi-Oh or the shows I watch, because these things like really influence my psyche and programmed me like in a way that I see as positive from an early age, and I think it's the same for a lot of people, especially in our generation. So that's a powerful thing to play on. Hell yeah.
Yeah, man.
We could literally just do like a and what's the one in Skyrim? We could do like a thieves guild, like an IRL thieves guild, or a
No, yeah, that like these are real things that can be enacted. And the funny thing is the Gen Xers and the boomers are so occupied with their work, but the millennials and the Gen Zs don't really like work. They do work because they have to,
yeah,
but they spend their excess mental energy, you know, doing their own thing. And so I think that our generation's probably primed to, if not restart an online, at least take the resource that we've been given because we were socialized using the internet, and so
right.
we can grow because not generations don't stay children forever. So we're not super well socialized, but as we grow, we can take the internet and bring it into the real world as we get older,
I love it.
and we can start, you know, repairing some of these vacancies that we have, and we can use mythos that we grew up with
Yes.
to do so.
That's so exciting. I love it, man. I love it. You're speaking my language. Like that's definitely like my vision, and it's kind of happening organically. Like you see, we see how powerful this is. Like for example, like I'm into competitive video games in particular, and that kind of whole thing has exploded. You've got millionaires who play this, and like we went to a championship in Atlanta last year, and it was crazy. Like an entire stadium filled up to watch people play video games competitively. And you know, it's just you know whatever the new Netflix adaptation is, just explodes and it's making millions of dollars. I mean, and you know, so it's like the money's
You gotta
already
watch
there.
out for you gotta watch out for the more neurotic types and
Of
the
course,
NPC types, but those are relatively easy to screen for.
yeah, and that's the thing I was thinking too is that among those people who really openly kind of connect with the fiction that they grew up with, that's kind of a trade off you see a lot of times is they are kind of then they're not rooted in reality. This goes back to the tree. They've got those
They've
branches.
offloaded their thinking capacity from a young age to virtual, you know, systems. You see this a lot in the prepper community, or
Right.
even like the what Kurt calls the loser right, where
Hmm.
they have videos of themselves, you know, stockpiling cans or toilet paper or whatever the hell, and they're
Right.
like, "Oh, the world's gonna end," and they don't have critical thinking skills, and they never have, and so they go online and they parrot things they hear, not
Right.
articulating,
Right.
and they refuse to articulate because they see it as, you know, the intellectuals are the bad ones. Um,
Yeah.
and you
Exactly.
also see that a lot with the majority as well. They'll go about life repeating things they hear in their head, but they don't actually sit down and ask themselves, why do I think this? Does it matter? Things like that.
Yeah, so this is a fundamental question that I come back to, and this is very core to this discussion about how to scale or just how in general do people like us, like people who are actually like aware and intellectually plugged in, how do we best plug into society, or how do we best design society in a way that facilitates, and this is one of the biggest challenges, is that most people prefer to offload, and oftentimes to bad actors. And so it's kind of like, how do, and this is something I've said about Christianity, for example, all the time. I'm like, I get that a majority of people in society do not want to like really put the legwork in or the mental work in to figure all this stuff out. They want something just kind of handed to them. They want someone to lead them and protect them, and that's it. And that's all fine. Just get the right people to protect, to do that. Like, let people you can trust, who understand truth, who are trying to do the best for our people. Let them lead, not people who are trying to destroy us. Like, that's the fundamental goal. So it all comes down to that
Well,
question.
it gets dangerous when the people who lead were once followers,
Right.
and they're just NPCs leading NPCs. Like
Exactly.
France is a prime example of this, where they had just elected idiot after an idiot, and they got to the point where the person they elected was no different than the electorate, the people, the commoners.
Yeah.
And he's just as he's there. There's no foresight, and it's creating problems, and it's the society's breaks. Civilization is not breaking down. Society is breaking down.
Right.
We still have food. We still have water. We still have power. Well,
But
South
our
Africa
but
doesn't, but
our
everyone else does.
our minds, our
um,
frames are breaking down. Our
yes, exactly.
values, our
Um,
priorities. Yeah.
so you definitely want to screen for the NPC types. I always do. My go-to is, I will say the most reactionary NPC topic during comments just to see what they say.
I support the current thing. I don't support the current thing. Yeah. Um, so one of the ways that I think about this problem is a lot of it is, and like you said too, like you've got blind leading the blind. A lot of it has to do with democracy. Like, so a lot of it is a systematic problem that could be fixed systematically. Like, let's structure how we do elections and representation, and let's maybe incorporate technology. But also,
You also have four generations raised by women, which impaired their thinking capacity,
yeah,
which didn't help.
that's a little harder. Yeah, we're gonna have to. That's one of those challenges that we'll probably have to kind of start to tackle as we gain more leverage. But there's definitely small steps we can take in the interim, and I think a big part of that is just, try to create an organic network of individuals. And what I mean by that is, like, let's say you've got over here like someone who's like super intelligent, and then you've got someone over here who's like really lower IQ. These two people aren't going to be able to really have much and get like trust or engagement or communication or whatever. But let's say that the intelligent person can establish a connection with like an influencer, like someone who is able to understand things to a degree, and they're also able to communicate things very well to like a larger population. They're almost like a priest of a local community church. So all you got to
Yeah,
do is
so
facilitate
I'm
those
following you,
connections.
but
Yeah.
I'm following you, but at the same time, when you have IQ discrepancies, sometimes they don't care. They don't have a whole lot of cognitive processing, right? Like when I talk with my, Egyptian girlfriend, her IQ, her perceived IQ is no more than like 105, 110.
Right.
She's not stupid by any means. But when I give her a complex, like when I poke a hole in Christianity, and she gives me that 5-year-old response, and I'm like, whatever I tell you is going to go right over your head
Right.
because
Right.
you don't know how to articulate that information. And even if I condense it as an influencer would, she doesn't care.
Right.
Her reality is, I was taught this as a child. This works for me. Why would I think about this?
Right.
There is no thought about it. There is no, let me change your mind. It's, this is the thought. Why would I question it?
So,
And so you have to go on topics they care about. Now, for women, specifically mine, and she's Arab, so they're more societal. They focus on people
right.
and status and things like that.
Exactly. That's what I was going to
So
say. Yeah.
I have to frame it in a way that of something they care about,
Yes.
and then implant it that way,
Yes.
which requires a lot of social planning that I don't think most people want to take on.
I agree, and that's exactly what I was going to say. Is that, yeah, like you're not going to be able to logically appeal to them and be like, look, this system's better, because they're not even operating in a logical framework. Like you said, especially with women and just lower IQ people in general, they operate based on social, emotional, and status seeking. And this is something we talked a lot about just in terms of just general political ideas, which is that these movements a lot of times grow very slowly at first, but once you have enough infrastructure, there is the ability to for women to seek status, or people in general to seek status by joining that ideology, and then it starts to
Yeah,
snowball. It starts
as
to
we both know, status seeking is huge in the Baptist church. So
yeah, and in just in like we know in general. So it's just about that
no, what
slow.
I'm saying is that that's an example that we can use that's
Yeah,
in the real world that shows that it works.
yeah. When we're trying to appeal to these lower IQ people and stuff, we just have to give them an opportunity to seek status. Like, it's like, hey, you can, yeah, we will give you status and respect. Oh, sorry.
I'm listening.
Okay, yeah. I was gonna say we'll give you status and respect if you kind of just go along with these basic kind of basic rules or basic frames or basic contribution. Yeah, and that's what most people want. So all we got to do is give them an opportunity or an avenue. So
Yeah, I agree.
yep, yep. So that'll be that's that's just kind of some of the vision in the frame. It just really comes down to the logistics. It's just about, hey, let's just I try to think about it like I'm gonna try to reach out to someone, try to meet a new person every week, or like try to have set up conversations like this like once or twice a week just to keep the engagement going. And the idea is just like anything that grows, it just kind of hopefully branches out like a tree. We just start to get more people in the mix, and yeah, just do it how the Christians do. Just be evangelical. Just maybe not quite flying to Africa. Let's focus on our own community first. But uh, that's the idea.
Yeah, man, that's cool.
Hell yeah.
You don't by no means do we have to discuss the 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 list that I gave you
Oh yeah.
now. But you are welcome to like review it if you want, and then ask me questions about it, or we can do it like live. It doesn't matter either way. If you want to keep talking about conversations.
Well, I did intend to do that, but I guess that might be a good one for next time. I guess that'll give me some time to. I guess we're getting close to an hour. That'll give me some time to read the whole document and kind of maybe go ahead and collect some thoughts on it, and then maybe we can get together for another session like next week and go ahead and dive into that, because I think we're already probably picking up on those same ideas, and kind of comparing our notes. We'll be able to kind of be like, okay, start to really hammer it. And yeah, I'm excited. I think we'll be able to continue to build something good out of this.
That's good, man.
Cool. Alrighty, yeah. Like I said, I guess that's a decent place to break it to break it. Unless there's anything else you wanted to cover today.
I don't have anything on top of my head.
Cool. Yeah, it's been a great productive session, and kind of all along that similar topic of just organizing and how we can scale. So we did really good there. So I'll go ahead and clip it here. Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see y'all next time.